My name is Terry Porter. I am second generation of residential school survivors. My mom, my dad, and there's 8 in our family. 7 of us in our family went to the residential school. The reason why the other one didn't, the last one didn't go, was because he was too young and the school itself shut down. And that's where I stand. I'm a second generation. I went there for a couple of years. I also went to the residential school, to the day school, and then from there to the public school system. Now, now some of the kids that were at this went from the residential school to the day school, went back to the residential school, and so. You'd think that day school was a step towards public school system, but it wasn't for some. They had to go back to the residential school for a couple more years. For reasons, they might have lost their family, you know, their parents left, and so they had to go back to the residential school. The grandmother couldn't look after all of them, so that was some of the reasons. Not all.
Do you remember your experience vividly, or do you talk about it?
Well, I don't talk about my residential school experience with my family. I got a daughter, a son, and 5 grandchildren. I don't. And once in a while, I relieve a little something that happened there, but usually I don't keep. I keep all that in with myself, but I do talk about it with other residential school survivors. You know, we have something in common. We don't have to explain ourselves. You know, so you go ahead and talk about what happened there. Sometimes you have the funny stories, and you laugh and everything else like that, but you never reveal the really rough stuff. You know, and but it's easier to talk about the residential school with other survivors, you know. And I never talk to my kids about it, not very often. You know,
Was it to protect them from the pain, or or is it more you felt that is private?
well, both. You know, both was. Yeah, you want to keep it to yourself, you know, because it's our generation, you know, the residence school generation, and you want to keep it away from them because our kids, the residential school survivors, the children, the grandchildren are doing so well. They're university educated, they got trades, they got, you know, the life is mapped out better than ours, you know, and because they have a lot of success in their life, we made sure that happened.
What do you feel about the discovery with the children's remains?
Well, you know, I felt sad. I felt sad about everything that happened there. You know, there's so many people that students that were loaded up in cattle trucks and brought to the residential school. You know, and I had one of the elders and council members, a longtime council member of the Bonaparte Band. He was telling me about his experience going to the residential school in the cattle truck, you know, and people were getting sick. You know, the students were getting sick, and they were excited to go, but as they get further away from home, things got reality, I guess, started to set in. You know, and the funny thing about that is the person that was driving that truck, cattle truck, was a residential school survivor himself.
Wow. So he would have been first generation?
Well, the one that was driving the cattle truck, I mean, he was the first or second generation. Well, we don't know if their siblings went to that, and if and a lot of the siblings, not a lot, but I've known one one band member that went to the residential school and never learned how to read or write. He was there just for farm help, feeding the animals here and there, but he never learned to read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And he come out of there not. And the sad thing about all the graves that were found there was the people that sent their kids to school and then never come back.
Mm-hmm.
And the explanation was, oh, they ran away or they, whatever the case is. It's so hard, for communities to comprehend something like that. And I realized that a lot of them are going to be sad because something like this happened, And but the thing is, they had no choice but to send their kids there. The Indian Act says you have to send your kids to the residential school or face the consequences. So they sent them there. So I strongly believe that the Indian Act had a lot to do with it. They were forcing kids to go there. And I use this example at one I guess speech was if you send 100 students there and only 75 return, what happened to the other 25? How do you explain to the families that then they send them they send them back to the residential school and more don't return? What happens? I mean, those are some of the god awful things that happen. They give you compensation. I mean, I got a measly compensation there, and but it's not compensation. I'm talking. What's not money? I mean, I couldn't care less about the money. It's the things that happened there. The so-called, tragedy that nobody reported. Nobody, it's completely uncalled for.
Do you feel angry?
Oh, definitely. I mean, all the residential school survivors. I mean, I talked to a few of them that are here on our reserve, and of course they're angry. They're mad. They heard stories. I mean, my dad tells me a story about some of the kids that went missing there when he was going to school there. And they asked where they went, and they said, "Oh, they went home." Or they ran away.
Was there any evidence of other reasons why they may have disappeared? Were there any whispers or discussions?
Among the students, I imagine there were a lot of whispers, a lot of them were sick, moaning and groaning on their beds beside them, and they often wondered what happened to those sick kids, and they never got the explanation from it. And our so-called leaders back then, they didn't fight for us.
The Indigenous leaders or the government?
Both the government leaders and the Indigenous people. I mean, they did. Maybe they didn't know how to fight. I don't know. The Indian agent came here and told them they were the boss. Indian agents were the boss. You have to go back to school. You have to do this. And they were the ultimate say.
The Indian agents.
Indian agents. I mean, they come along and tell our parents that we had to go to school over there. I mean, we couldn't go to school in a public school system just 2 miles down the road. Mm-hmm. We had to go 50 miles away to go to school. Yeah. Didn't make sense.
Do you want to talk to other people outside of your family about your experience, the non-Indigenous people?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the so-called general public has got to know what happened there. They can't just, and they got to know what the federal government did and the so-called churches. I am baptized a Catholic, and I knew every prayer in the book by the time I was 8 years old. And today I don't go to church. I couldn't care less about the church, and I've never practiced the Catholic religion. After I left there, they could keep. That's not something I ever want, and I don't want it for my kids either.
Do you feel people here in our communities in Ashcroft and Cache Creek need to be more responsive to what has happened to our people in our communities?
Oh, definitely, and they will be. They will be. This is just start. This is just a start. People want to be interviewed. They've got their hands up. Interview me. Let me tell you my story. Let me tell you what's happening to me. And in my opinion, there's not enough women interviewed. You got to interview the women who are sexually abused here and used for just maids. They're going to get emotional, like everybody else does. You've got a lot of stories to tell, and they're not all good, we amongst the residential school survivors, we laugh about some of the things that we did there. We had to steal apples to because we were hungry,
Mm-hmm.
I had when I was now, mind you, I was only 5 years old when I went there. Now I had two people looking after me. You could call them, as Catholic religion will call them, guardian angels. I had two people looking after me, my cousins, older than me. They looked after me, and I'm very thankful for that.
To protect you from?
Oh, definitely. They looked after me, and my cousins, my first cousins, and they looked after me. But I often wondered who looked after them,
Yeah.
They sure looked after us, and I'm sure grateful for that.
Yeah. What would give you peace, and what would give you peace for generations from moving forward?
One of the things that I said this in one of the posts I put out on Facebook, is that if given a chance to sit face to face with the federal government and the churches, one of the questions I'd ask the federal government is why? Same thing with the churches. Why? Why were the residential schools formed? Explain that to me. No excuses, no nothing. You explain to me, the federal government, explain to me why this was formed. Why kids had to be sent there.
This was in the Indian Act, right?
That's within the Indian Act. And that Indian Act today has got to be changed because of what's happened there. It has to be changed. The Indian Act is an outdated, handbook, according to them, the federal government that relies on it. It's a sorry piece of legislation as far as I'm concerned. And as for the Catholic Church, they preach about God. They preach about their God, white man's God. They preach about white man's God, and they talk about this and that, and yet they're killing our people. It makes no sense.
How do you practice your culture now? Were you not allowed to practice your culture going to school?
Well, one of the things that I never was taught. Now, mind you, both my parents, my mom and dad. My mom is from Canoe Creek Band in Williams Lake area. My dad is from here, Bonaparte. They're very, very fluent in English, in Sichuan, our language. Both of them. We were never taught our language, And I asked my dad one time, why? And all he said is, we tried. I can't remember him ever trying, but I accepted the answer and I just left it there. And but that's the one thing I wished I could speak my language. I could be able to sit and have a good conversation with some of the fluent speakers, and we have very few in our band now. I wished I could sit there and have a Shuswap language conversation with them, and I can't.
Could you learn today? They have more.
And that's what they have to bring back, is the
Here?
language. Yeah. And sometimes you have to push the staff and the leadership to make that happen, because they've been so long without it, they don't know how to start it sometimes. They don't know how to start the residential school, I guess.
It's almost like people become frozen.
Yes, the residential school is something that they never want to talk about. They don't know, there's some people up there that don't want to even be, the school has done a good job for some of our band members, because they're so ashamed of being a native person, and so ashamed of speaking their language, but if I could speak the language, I'd be very proud. I'd love to be able. I'd love to teach my kids, and I think that's what should happen, is that the kids are young enough to teach now.
Mm-hmm.
Teach them
in the schools and
the schools here on the reserves. Technology we have today, the kids are, that's their thing, is technology. Put it in technology. That's easy to do for them, hard for us.
they can teach you.
Yes, definitely. They could teach us.
Yeah. What do you hope for your community and your family moving forward?
Well, I hope they, with the mass graves that are discovered there, I hope that the chief and council and their survivors get behind this, I guess, request for justice, and make sure that we go after the right people and don't let go. And we have to keep after them, because the residential school, the survivors that we have here now, some of them are suffering from medical conditions. They talk about heart problems, cancer, diabetes. It's taking effect on the elders here that went to that school.
Is there anything else you would like to share with our community or your family about anything?
Well, the one thing I like to share is that is don't let this go. Make sure that this here is taught in schools, the public school system, and make sure it's not let go, because the residential school survivors, once the last one passes away here on our reserve, they're just history. I like to see, if it can happen, is my band with the residential school survivors who are still alive, is take a picture. Take a picture of the residential school survivors. And those that aren't with us, send some pictures in. That's what I like to do, and put it in our band office.
Yeah.
That is part of history right there.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And you can't find better history than that, because you see, in my opinion, we're visual learners, and we're taught to be visual, and I think if we could teach the language that way, it'll catch on faster, because that's what my dad said. That's how he was taught the language too, was being visual. And elders would grab, put a blanket on the floor, so to speak, and they'd get 6 items, and they'd they tell them what those items are in your language. And that's something you'll never forget. Because you see it, it's in your brain. You're never going to forget that. That is how to teach our language. One of the ways to teach our language. And we have a few chiefs that can speak the language, past chiefs. And I'm so proud of them, the way they could speak our language. I'm just so proud of those guys. I wish I could speak. A few of those kids were sent back to the residential school. This is the Bonaparte Band School.
Oh, okay. Are you in here?
Yep, I am right there.
That.
And that's the Bonaparte Band School.